Do one more? All right, do one more. Hit one. Oh, no!
Richard Dreyfuss has always been one of Hollywood's most recognizable and complicated stars. From his Academy Award-winning performance in The Goodbye Girl to unforgettable roles in Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, he carved out a reputation as one of the most talented actors of his generation. But behind the camera, his career was marked by turmoil, controversy, and deeply personal struggles that nearly cost him everything. Now, at 77 years old, Dreyfuss is finally pulling back the curtain and explaining the meltdown that changed the course of his life and career forever. For decades, fans only saw the charming, witty, and often brilliant performer who brought so many characters to life. What they didn't see were the battles he was fighting behind closed doors: addiction, professional conflicts, and a notorious reputation for being difficult on set. His outbursts became Hollywood legend, whispered about among producers and fellow actors who often described him as brilliant but volatile. The meltdown he now speaks about wasn't a single moment, but rather a breaking point built on years of personal demons and professional pressure. It not only damaged his career but also forced him to confront truths about himself that he had long tried to avoid. In his own words, Dreyfuss admits that it was this collapse that eventually gave him clarity, but it came at a cost so great that he still struggles to make peace with it today. What exactly caused Richard Dreyfuss to spiral into this meltdown? How did it impact his career, his relationships, and his very sense of self? And why, after so many years of silence, is he finally speaking about it now? Richard Dreyfuss's story begins like that of many young actors who burst onto the Hollywood scene in the late 1960s and 1970s. Talented, ambitious, and eager to prove himself, he quickly rose to prominence through small but memorable roles on television before landing the kinds of opportunities most actors could only dream of. With his starring role in American Graffiti, 1973, Dreyfuss captured the restless spirit of a generation. 2 years later, Jaws turned him into a household name almost overnight. By the time Close Encounters of the Third Kind arrived in 1977, Richard Dreyfuss was not just a star, he was one of the defining faces of a new era in cinema. Yet, even as his career soared, pressure was building beneath the surface. Fame came fast and furious, and with it came the kind of scrutiny and expectations that few young actors are prepared to handle. Colleagues often described Dreyfuss as intense and highly intelligent, but also mercurial. On set, he was known for his quick wit and charisma, but also for impatience and a tendency to clash with directors when he felt a project wasn't living up to its potential. Hollywood insiders admired his raw honesty, but feared his volatility. By the late 1970s, Dreyfuss was riding a wave of success few actors could match. In 1978, he became the youngest man ever to win the Academy Award for Best Actor for The Goodbye Girl, cementing his place among the industry's elite. But while audiences saw a confident, unstoppable star, Dreyfuss himself felt a gnawing sense of insecurity. He has since admitted that he often questioned whether he truly deserved the acclaim, and those doubts began to fuel destructive habits. It was during this period that drugs entered his life. Cocaine, in particular, became a dangerous companion. In interviews years later, Dreyfuss would describe himself as someone who was both functioning and spiraling at the same time, able to deliver brilliant performances while privately losing control. Hollywood parties, late nights, and excess became part of his routine. The more his public image shined, the darker his private struggles became. Friends and colleagues noticed the change. Stories circulated about erratic behavior on set, moments of anger that seemed out of proportion, and stretches where Dreyfuss appeared detached or distracted. One colleague recalled that while Dreyfuss could be the most engaging presence in the room, he could just as quickly withdraw into himself, lost in whatever storm was raging inside. The pressure to maintain his career at the highest level only made things worse. As he took on demanding roles, Dreyfuss found himself fighting not just the expectations of audiences and critics, but also his own inner demons. His addictions began to interfere with his work, and his reputation as a difficult actor grew louder with each project. Though he continued to land major films, whispers around Hollywood suggested that Dreyfuss was on a dangerous path. What few realized at the time was that he was heading toward a breaking point, a meltdown that would not only derail his career, but also force him to confront truths he had long tried to bury. For Richard Dreyfuss, the climb to the top of Hollywood had been fast and exhilarating, but it was becoming clear that the fall would be just as swift and far more painful. The meltdown Richard Dreyfuss now speaks of so openly didn't happen overnight. It was the culmination of years of mounting pressure, personal insecurity, and the destructive grip of addiction. By the early 1980s, he was no longer the young star with limitless potential, but a man caught in a cycle that was spiraling beyond his control. The breaking point came in 1982, when Dreyfuss was involved in a near-fatal car crash in Los Angeles. Police later revealed that his car had collided with a tree after veering off the road, and when first responders arrived, they found cocaine in the wreckage. The accident stunned Hollywood. For years, whispers about his drug use had circulated, but this was undeniable proof that the rumors had substance. Dreyfuss's reputation took a massive blow, and the headlines that followed painted a picture of a once promising star who was quickly unraveling. The incident forced him into rehab, but the damage was already done. Film studios grew wary of casting him in leading roles, concerned that his volatility would derail productions. Directors who had once praised his brilliance began to view him as a liability. For Dreyfuss, the shift was devastating. He had spent the better part of a decade at the very top of Hollywood, and now, almost overnight, he found himself on the outside looking in. In later interviews, he would admit that the crash and its aftermath were the wake-up call he had needed, but at the time, it felt like his life had collapsed. "I had lost everything that mattered to me," he confessed years later. His addiction had not only endangered his life, but had also stripped him of the credibility he had worked so hard to build. The meltdown wasn't just about drugs or career setbacks. It was also deeply personal. Dreyfuss struggled with depression, which he has since spoken about candidly. He described feeling trapped in a cycle of self-doubt and anger, often lashing out at those closest to him. Relationships suffered, friendships dissolved, and his sense of self-worth crumbled. For a man who had always been seen as quick-witted and sharp, the descent into darkness was all the more painful. Hollywood, of course, is quick to move on, and in the years following his meltdown, other actors stepped into the spotlight he once commanded. Dreyfuss, meanwhile, faced the daunting task of rebuilding not only his career but his life. He admitted that in those years, he felt both invisible and humiliated, as though the industry had written him off entirely. Still, there was a resilience in him that refused to disappear. While the meltdown marked the lowest point in his life, it also set the stage for a long and difficult journey of recovery. Dreyfuss would later say that it was in confronting the wreckage of his mistakes that he began to find clarity. The meltdown had forced him to see himself not as the brilliant, untouchable star Hollywood had celebrated, but as a man deeply flawed and in need of change. Looking back, he doesn't deny the pain or the destruction of that time. Instead, he calls it the moment that stripped away illusions and revealed truths he had long avoided. The meltdown, as devastating as it was, became the turning point that would ultimately change everything for him. After the car crash and the humiliating fallout that followed, Richard Dreyfuss was left with two choices: continue down the same destructive path or confront his demons head-on. For a time, it wasn't clear which direction he would take. Hollywood had effectively turned its back on him, and many believed his career was finished. But slowly, painfully, Dreyfuss began to rebuild, both his life and his reputation. Rehab was the first step. Though the process was grueling, Dreyfuss eventually admitted that it saved him. He had to come to terms with the depth of his addiction and the damage it had caused. For the first time, he began speaking openly about his struggles, acknowledging that the very same intensity that made him such a magnetic actor had also driven him towards self-destruction. In his words, he had to strip away the star and deal with himself as a human being, vulnerable and flawed. By the mid-1980s, he began cautiously re-entering the film world. Though some producers were reluctant, others were willing to give him another chance. Films like Down and Out in Beverly Hills, 1986, reminded audiences of his remarkable talent, showing that beneath the headlines and the controversy, the brilliance was still there. Slowly, his reputation shifted from a cautionary tale to that of a survivor, someone who had stared into the abyss and found his way back. Yet the scars of the meltdown never fully disappeared. Dreyfuss himself has said that even when he was performing at his best, the memory of how close he had come to losing everything never left him. In interviews, he often returned to the themes of redemption and responsibility, insisting that his recovery was not just about career,